Good morning. The committee will come to order, and thank you all for being here today. This is the second hearing on appeals reform in the last 6 months, which underscores the importance of this issue to the committee. After hearing horror stories of veterans who have been waiting 5, 6, 7 years, even longer, for a final decision on their claims, the Veterans Appeals Improvement and Modernization Act of 2017, the AMA gave veterans hope that a modern appeals system could improve appeals processing. Congress worked on appeals. It did not end with the passage of the law. We will hold as many hearings as we need to ensure the VA effectively implements the law. The VA is telling us that the law will go into effect February of 2019, less than 7 months from now. But between now and February, VA has a lot of work to do. The department has to update its IT system, issue regulations, create forms, train employees, allocate staff appropriately. To help us monitor VA's progress on appeals reform, the AMA requires the department submit reports every 90 days. I was very disappointed that the first report, which was submitted last November, lacked many details because it seemed that the VA had not yet focused on all the steps it needed to take to implement the AMA. However, the next two reports, which were submitted in February and May, were better and contained much-needed details. This showed me that VA is beginning to think through all the steps it will need to effectively overhaul the current appeals process, including its IT systems, which is one of the most important components of the new appeals system. Needless to say, appeals reform can't go into effect unless the department's computer programs are able to manage appeals in the new system. During the January hearing, Mr. McClinican testified that about 75% of the IT functionality would be delivered by August. Last Thursday, VA informed my staff that only 35% of the core functions will actually be completed by next month, with remaining core functions delivered in December. VA has assured my staff that executing this plan remains a first priority of VBA and OI&T technology resources. During the July 18th Economic Opportunities Subcommittee hearing, VA testified that OI&T is working 24/7 on updating the IT systems for the Forever GI Bill. I would appreciate some clarification on how OI&T intends to balance both of these top priorities to ensure that both are timely accomplished. I am concerned about whether the appeals software will be ready in time and whether VA will have the contingency plan if it is not ready. I also expect to get an update on the status of the new regulations that VA will need to begin handling appeals in the new system. Publishing new federal regulations is a long process that can sometimes take years. My understanding is that the regulations are supposed to be published this morning. Frankly, the department has its work cut out to finalize regulations and be completely ready for the new system by February of 2019. It's also important that VA understand that this committee not only expects the department to successfully roll out the new appeals system, but to also reduce the current appeals backlog. Right now, VA has a backlog of almost 430,000 pending appeals, with many veterans waiting 6 years or longer just for a final decision on their claims for benefits. That's unacceptable. Veterans have a right to get a correct decision on their claims in the first place, but if they disagree with the decision, they should have their appeals decided accurately and within a reasonable amount of time. VA had hoped that the Rapid Appeals Modernization Program, or RAMP, which allows veterans who have pending appeals to transfer to the new system, would significantly reduce the number of legacy appeals. However, it doesn't look like RAMP will make much of a dent in the appeals backlog, since only 13% of eligible veterans have chosen to transfer to RAMP. And I will say that I have been out and talked to some benefits folks, and the RAMP program seems to work. It's convincing, and when I was out speaking to the DAV National Convention, I encouraged them to use RAMP because I said, this is something that it's a resource I don't think you're using right now, and you can get an appeals claim adjudicated much quicker. And I've heard that from several of our claims people out there. So I would encourage all of us on this dais to inform and educate our own constituents about the use of RAMP. One of my biggest concerns is how VA will resolve the appeals backlog while putting the new law into practice with the current leadership vacuum. And that vacuum just got solved last night. Just last night, the Senate confirmed Secretary Wilkie's nomination, and right now the department still does not have a permanent deputy secretary or chief information officer. Although I trust that the people at this table are doing the best they can right now, there's no one single person who has a responsibility for overseeing appeals reform both at VBA and the board. VA needs to ensure that both VBA and the board are talking to each other, particularly with respect to developing integrated IT systems that will allow employees to better communicate with each other. I'm looking forward to an open and productive discussion to ensure that when the law is fully implemented, the VA will have developed a process that provides veterans with accurate and timely decisions on their claims that they deserve. Again, I want to thank all the witnesses for being here today, and I now yield to Ranking Member Takano for any opening statement that he might have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, we congratulate Secretary-designate Wilkie on his confirmation by the Senate yesterday, and we look forward to working together with him in the future. I will get to the details of appeals modernization in a moment, but it is no secret that several actions taken by top VA leadership recently are troubling to our side of the aisle. I do not think we can get together as a full committee and pretend that these controversies don't impact important progress in key programs throughout the agency, including the implementation of the Appeals Improvement and Modernization Act. First, the Senate actually had to intervene in late June to ensure the right of VA's IG to obtain records as part of an ongoing investigation. Acting Secretary O'Rourke refused to cooperate with the requests for information of the VA Inspector General. Because Mr. O'Rourke's failure to cooperate is unprecedented, several of us sent a letter to the Council of the Inspectors General on Integrity and Efficiency, which provides oversight of federal IGs. If he or the new Secretary are allowed to ignore the IG's request for information in the future, an important check will be lost on the kinds of waste and impropriety this committee has been trying to locate and eliminate. The vote was 96-0 in the Senate to rein in Acting Secretary O'Rourke. This vote shouldn't have been necessary, and it is a distraction from the work VA should be doing. Furthermore, when I asked him about it in our full committee hearing last Tuesday, Mr. O'Rourke's answer was that the IG's, quote, access to OAWP has been unfettered since day one, end quote. This was untrue. Secondly, recently, several key career employees were moved to less important positions or pushed out, many seemingly without cause. After highly credible concerns were raised in whistleblower reports and press interviews with VA employees, several of us sent a letter to the U.S. Office of Special Counsel asking for an investigation into whether these career public servants were moved out for cause or for political reasons, actions which could violate the Hatch Act or other Title V protections. This is yet another distraction from what VA should be doing. There has been considerable shuffling of leadership staff at VBA too. We have just welcomed a new Undersecretary for Benefits, Dr. Paul Lawrence, for whom we wish nothing but success. But two key VBA vacancies remain unfilled: Deputy Undersecretary for Disability Assistance and Deputy Undersecretary for Economic Opportunity. Now, though we are grateful for the experience and continued dedication to duty of Chair Mason at the board, Mr. Thrower in the Office of Information Technology, and Mr. McClanahan, Ms. Murphy, Ms. Quill, and others at VBA, if appeals modernization is going to be implemented on time in 7 short months, VBA management must stabilize. Vacant positions must be filled, and the controversies and distractions of all this shuffling must end. The Appeals Improvement and Modernization Act, signed into law on August 23rd of last year, was a triumph of bipartisanship. There was and is nothing Republican or Democratic about what we were able to accomplish together. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge Congresswoman Dita Titus of Nevada for her extraordinary skill and her effort at bringing the stakeholders together. The VSOs invested a lot of time in the idea that if they put aside some long-held differences and worked in concert with the other and the VA, a better way forward could be devised. This was an unprecedented coming together of our veteran service organizations, and we thank them for that. The result of all this was of this effort was the Appeals Improvement and Modernization Act, and after 11 months, we are now at a key point in the implementation process. The long-awaited regulations will be published this week. What these regulations say and whether the IT necessary to make all of this work can be delivered on time are where we should be. These are what we should be concentrating our efforts on. These regulations and the IT. GAO will testify that there are still gaps in key areas. The report says that VA's plan for a performance measurement system lacks specificity. The timeline does not reflect the interdependencies among key activities. And finally, VA has not done the risk assessments basic to any change management strategy. Nonetheless, there is progress and hope for a successful rollout to full implementation in February. The pilot programs are in place. Claims processors and attorneys have been hired. Impressive IT has been delivered and is working at the board. Having said that, if another leadership upheaval sweeps through and the experienced hands like those here today are replaced or reassigned, appeals improvement and modernization could be jeopardized. Now, we are very, very proud of this act, and we don't want unnecessary distractions to get into the way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I really appreciate him mentioning our agenda a better way in his comments. That was good. Joining us today are the Honorable Paul Lawrence, the Undersecretary of Benefits. He is accompanied by the Honorable Cheryl Mason, the Chairman of the Board of Veterans Appeals. Thank you for being back. David McClinchin, the Director of Appeals Management Office at the Veterans Benefit Administration. Richard Hippolyte, the Deputy General Counsel for Legal Policy with the General Counsel's Office. By Mr. Lloyd Throer, the Deputy Chief Information Officer, Account Manager and Benefits Portfolio of the Office of Information and Technology, Elizabeth Curta, the Director of Education, Workforce, and Income Security Team for GAO. She is accompanied by James T. Whitcomb, the Assistant Director of the Education, Workforce, and Income Security Team at GAO. Thank all of you all for being here this morning. And Mr. Undersecretary Lawrence, you are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Rowe, Ranking Member Takano, and members of the committee. Thank you for inviting us to provide an update on VA's progress implementing the Veterans Appeals Improvement and Modernization Act. You've just introduced my team to the left, and so I'll save your time and not do that again. We agree this legislation is the most significant statutory change affecting VA appeals in decades. We want to thank the committee again for their support and legislative efforts, which will allow VA to transform and streamline a long-standing process into one that will positively impact veterans. I am pleased to report that appeals modernization remains on track for implementation in February 2019. My confidence is based on my work with the team since I was sworn in. I have regularly met to review our team, the schedule, and our progress, and I can tell you that we have a strong team in place with a well-thought-out plan for implementation and beyond. In addition to the weekly meetings I convene with our VBA team, I meet twice monthly with Chairman Mason to review this work. Prior to my confirmation, the Deputy Secretary met regularly with Chairman Mason and the AMO team to review progress. Lastly, we meet with GAO and Congress regularly to report on our progress. We have been transparent and plan to continue having these open discussions. We all want to avoid surprises with the implementation date. The Rapid Appeals Modernization Program, or RAMP, is a significant achievement. As of July 2018, over 31,000 veterans had opted into RAMP, and more than $33 million in retroactive benefits have been paid. VA is also processing RAMP claims at an average of 84 days, well below the average processing goal of 125 days. RAMP is providing valuable insights into staff composition, workload management, successful methods of outreach, and identification of quality errors. The Board's Early Applicability of Appeals Modernization, or BEAM, research program is providing feedback to inform assumptions about veterans' choices and experiences. While the results of BEAM are still being reviewed, veterans report they are optimistic about the changes and appreciate VA for working with them. VA submitted the proposed rules for appeals modernization to the Federal Register on July 18th. We are waiting for them to publish as soon as they complete their own review. VBA's appeals program is supported by 1,495 FTEs. VBA has requested an additional 605 FTE in the 2019 President's budget to process legacy appeals and decision reviews under the modernized process. To create further efficiencies and ensure it meets its stated goals, VBA is establishing 3 Decision Review Operations Center under the direct control and oversight of VBA's Appeals Management Office. To ensure smooth implementation, the Board is also undertaking an aggressive plan to recruit, hire, and train new employees. The Board is currently on pace to hire up to a total of approximately 1,050 FTEs by the end of the year. Chairman Mason has also recently recommended 8 Veterans Law Judge candidates to fill vacancies. We have been focusing on resolving legacy appeals for veterans. At the end of June, VBA's inventory had decreased by almost 13%, and appeals production was 8.7% above target. VBA plans to complete its legacy appeals by the end of 2020. The Board has delivered a record production of over 64,000 decisions thus far in FY 2018 and is on track to deliver over 81,000 decisions to veterans by the end of the year. The Department has undertaken efforts to modernize the appeals process through improvements in technology, and I am pleased to report that these activities are on track and all milestones have been met. In January, as you referenced, sir, we told the committee that we would have 75% of the IT complete by August, with the rest finished by December. This estimate was based on early analysis of the system requirements for appeals modernization. We have learned much since January, and I want to update you on the schedule. Our current plan is to complete 6 core functions, approximately 35% in August, and 11 other functions, the remaining 65%, by December. Our current estimate is based on a detailed examination of the business and engineering requirements as they relate to the VBMS software. It accounts for core pieces that must be installed in the August release before other changes may be added in the software development process. VA has a high level of confidence in the success of this plan because it is based on the inputs of long-standing VBMS project teams in both VA and VA's OI&T. We will continue to closely monitor this development plan and advise the committee of any delays we encounter. But again, all milestones have been met and we are on track. Lastly, in terms of communication, VA is currently holding regular discussions with VSOs, veteran advocates, congressional stakeholders, and GAO. Through collaboration, senior leadership from the Board and VBA have provided approximately 25 outreach sessions this year, with more scheduled. Most importantly, VA is listening to our veterans to help us improve the services we provide. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my statement. We'll be pleased to respond to any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Lawrence. And Ms. Curley, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Rowe, Vice Ranking Member Takano, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here to discuss GAO's observations on VA's progress in planning for the reform of its disability appeals process. Reforming the appeals process is a complex endeavor involving major process, people, and technology changes, an endeavor that will affect the lives of hundreds of thousands of veterans with disabilities. Such a major undertaking requires careful planning to improve VA's chances of success. Last March, we reported that while VA's initial plan reflected aspects of sound planning, improvements were still needed to provide greater assurance that appeals reform will be successful. We recommended that VA's plan, 1, address all legally required elements in the Act, 2, articulate how it will monitor and assess the performance of appeals processes, 3, augment its project plan for implementation, and 4, address risk more fully. VA agreed with our recommendations. Today, I will discuss our observations on how VA's updated plan reflects progress in implementing our March 2018 recommendations and areas where their plans could be more robust. Regarding addressing risks to the plan, VA has taken some important steps to address our recommendation. For example, previously, VA had plans to test only the 2 new VBA appeals options. Since then, VA has initiated a small-scale, non-generalizable test of the 3 new board options. VA plans to use these tests to collect information on what options veterans choose and their experiences using the new options. This additional information about the choices veterans make, given all 5 options, could help identify and mitigate some risks. VA is also better positioned to mitigate risks by developing new analytical tools that will enable it to better project resource needs using different assumptions about opt-in rates and productivity. While some progress has been made in assessing certain risks, VA has not made progress in articulating a full set of goals and measures for important dimensions of performance, such as timeliness, accuracy, and customer satisfaction. The plan includes timeliness goals for 3 of the 5 new options and indicates VA is collecting data to inform the development of additional performance measures, but will not complete this effort until after implementation of the new appeals process. However, sound planning practices call for agencies to define expected performance before they implement major process reforms, rather than letting the process define success after the fact. Similarly, the plan does not include success criteria or analysis plans for its ramp and board pilot tests. Without success criteria or analysis plans, it is unclear how VA will use the information from these tests to determine if the new process is working and enable comparisons to the legacy process. The new metrics VA is required to collect and report under Section 5 of the Reform Act could help VA measure the relative timeliness of the new and legacy processes, but VA has not articulated how it plans to make this assessment. Regarding project management, VA's plan provides more detail about planned activities, as well as some indicators it will use to assess its readiness for implementation. However, the project plan does not include the small-scale pilot of the new board options, a key activity, and lacks detail on other activities, such as its customer outreach effort. The master schedule also continues to lack information on how any delays in completing activities, such as IT development, would affect related activities, such as training and full implementation. VA officials indicated they plan to address some of these issues in their next update. Finally, VA's plan now addresses 18 of the Act's 22 required elements, which is up from the 17 we reported on in March. VA's plan now has fully addressed the element for projecting productivity and partially addresses the 4 remaining elements. VA's plan needs to address the 4 remaining elements, which include information vital to the success of appeals reform, such as delineating total resources required by VA for the new and legacy systems and setting milestones for the reduction of legacy appeals. In summary, VA's updated plan includes some important new details that increase the reform plan's chances for success. However, without fully addressing our recommendations, the plan continues to have shortcomings, such that we cannot be certain that implementation will go smoothly or that VA will know if the new system is performing any better than the system it is replacing. This concludes my prepared statement, and I will be happy to address the committee's questions.
Thank you. I'll yield myself 5 minutes and get started. Has the RAMP, and anyone can answer this, has the RAMP program given you any indication about which route the veterans might take? I know they're limited, not somewhat, it's limited, but has that given you any idea so that you'll know if you have the right personnel, Mr. Secretary, or anyone can take it?
To answer the detailed question.
Yes, sir. It has given us that information, and it's been pretty consistent throughout the program. We've been running it. About 2/3 of veterans are selecting the higher level review option, about 1/3 the supplemental claim. That's been surprisingly consistent throughout the whole program. I would expect it to even out a little bit more after we get to February, and we're actually just doing reviews after an initial decision is first made.
Does that help you when you're looking at your personnel to know which route, because that's what Ms. Curley was talking about. Does that help you somewhat?
Yes, it does, because the higher level reviewers are more experienced employees. Those are our decision review officers, so it does help us with how we need to allocate the resources we have to each of those lanes.
One of the things I would ask you to do so that we can compare apples to apples, whether you appeal back to the RO or to the board, I would still like you all to report that as an appeal and not name it something else, so that we look back a year from now and realize the appeals are half what they were, but they really are not. They're really the same. If we could do that, that would maybe all these members of the of the committee will understand that, but new members might not. And I don't want to let us give the impression to the veterans that we've cut these way down when really we haven't.
Yes, sir. We are addressing that. In the RAMP program, we're using what we call end products, separate end products, just for this workload, for RAMP workload. When we get to February, when we have the new law implemented, we're going to use separate end products for those things going forward. So
I
we're
would
going to
just
track.
call an appeal to the RO as versus an appeal to the board. Therefore, how many appeals? I understand what an appeal is. What you just said, I don't know what it is. So
So we're tracking the work separately, sir, so we will be able to report out on that.
That's,
Yes,
that's
sir.
important, I think. And I think the other thing with what we're doing, all these processes are extremely important. But what matters to our constituents and to the veterans out there is, do I hear something? I mean, in a timely fashion. That's really it. And that it doesn't take, and the word out on the street is, when you get this appeal done, it's going to take years probably. But I've had veterans come up to me now. I tell you, I'm very happy with the RAMP program, and come up and say, I heard something in 2 months. I had them right out in Reno tell me that. And I think you're to get a shout out for that. I think there's a great implementation. Mr. Undersecretary Lawrence, a question I have is that the VA has been fairly famous at not delivering on time. And with this IT being only 30, and I heard what you said, that you needed these 6 core measures before you could get to the 11. We're going to have another one of these hearings, hopefully before the end of the year, to go back to this, because it's very close to February. We're not very far away from that at all. And do you feel confident that we'll be there and be ready to roll, have the personnel you need, the IT systems? And the other thing I was going to ask Ms. Mason, you ought to talk about, since you're using different software, can those 2 software packages on an appeals to the board communicate with the software package you're using on the other side, the other 2 ramps?
Sure, thank you. Let me try to unpack all the different questions. So yes, to your broad one, I feel confident based on my review and inspection, and I'll ask Mr. Thrower to speak a little bit more about IT in just a second. The other thing I'd like to point out was, as you indicated, you just learned about this last week, and I think there was some confusion on our understanding of the information we should report to you. I think we were thinking mostly about the implementation date being in jeopardy, but that's on us. And what we agreed to do with your staff is have regular discussions of where we are on this. And I just volunteered, and Lloyd will repeat, us coming and talking about how we measure so that the units of measure are not unclear as well, so that we can provide you the level of comfort we have. But let Mr. Thrower talk about this too as well.
Yes, sir. So actually, we're very confident in our delivery schedule right now. Once we broke this out in February and looked at individual requirements, we stacked them, ranked them, and built a schedule that had a very level effort throughout. So we wouldn't have peaks and valleys throughout, so that we could have a level amount of effort throughout the entire year. We've met every single milestone that we've had. The pieces that we're delivering right now, the specific function points in August, are actually the heavy lift pieces, the ability to track claims and contingents. And so that's a huge step that we're making and we will be delivering next month. To the last point that you asked, specifically around the integration points between CaseFlow and VBMS, the 2 engineering teams have been working side by side since February of this year to understand the integration points between them and to test out capabilities along the way, and we've had a very smooth relationship between the 2 development teams.
Okay, thank you. My time's expired, but one last just comment, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Takano, is that we heard that things will be ready for the Forever GI Bill, and they're not ready to go. So that's our concern.
Dr. Lawrence, the GAO stakeholders and committee staff have continually pressed the need for detailed planning outlines. Yet the VA has failed to provide truly detailed plans and risk assessment. Can you please explain the reason why you have not provided the above details?
Sure. We very much value our relationship with GAO and want to work closely on them. We appreciate the detailed work they do on our program. In fact, Ms. Curtin and I were just talking on August 3rd. Her boss, the comptroller of the General United States, is coming over to our office to meet with me and talk about how we more closely and better understand that. That said, I think she reported that we continue to work closely and achieve many of those things. In just a second, I'll ask Mr. McClanahan, because he regularly meets with her. I think we're making progress. I think they continue to challenge us and push us further, and we want to work closely to make sure we do that. So, Mr. McClanahan, would you like to add anything?
Yes, sir. We do work closely, and as you heard in the prior report, 17 of the 22 recommendations that GAO had been fulfilled by us. We fulfilled one more to GAO's satisfaction, but this is a process of us continuing to work closely with them. Really, I could say that what my understanding what GAO is looking for is more detail. So every report that we issue, every update, we try to provide that other detailed information. I just want to point out that what's being reported today is based on an update that we did in May. Right now in concurrence in VA is our August update, so that will have additional details that GAO is looking for.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Curta, for the GAO, you mentioned in your testimony that it's best practice to identify a set of goals and measures before testing and implementing the new appeals process. Can you explain more about what you mean by that?
Certainly. It's really important to establish at the outset what the vision of success for the appeals reform will be so that you can design your program to achieve that vision of success. So having clear goals about how much time processes will take, the degree of accuracy, what is expected in terms of customer satisfaction are important for designing the system, for doing a risk assessment to determine if there are any things that can get you off track in terms of achieving those goals and mitigate for them. It's important for establishing accountability for what is expected in terms of results. And finally, for monitoring and feedback. So at the end of the day, you have information coming in telling you, are you on track? Are you achieving what was intended by appeals reform?
All right, well, thank you. And you believe that the VA has not sufficiently established those goals and measures. Is that correct?
That is correct. We have seen some timeliness information, but not for all the board options. And we have not seen other measures of performance that would be important to create what we call a balanced set of measures. You can do things much more quickly, but you have to keep an eye on accuracy as well, because if you're doing things faster, you could be making mistakes. So you need to keep an eye on both things. And I understand that they have existing measures and they intend to do more with those and to develop those, but now is the time to kind of get that worked out.
Okay, Dr. Lawrence, is the VBA stabilized? I mean, what I mean by that is the new reorganization of staff pretty much run its course? Do you feel confident that your team that they will be able to be in place enough, at least long enough, to see the implementation of this plan?
Sure. Yes. Let me tell you about my discovery when I arrived in the middle of May. I concluded very quickly that I am very fortunate, even blessed, to have a very strong senior team around me. So stabilize is not the word I would use, sir. I made some realignment to better focus on the needs of veterans, but I have no additional changes anticipated of that magnitude.
All right, very good. Mr. Chairman, I have no more questions. I'll yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. Chairman Boss, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Just kind of going down where we've already been going, and not to beat a dead horse, but Mr. Thrower, it's absolutely essential that IT has to be up. We were talking in January, Mr. Clinton, testified 75%, right? Functional would be delivered in August, which is a few days away. and we were informed, our staff was, that it's only 35%. That's kind of hard to figure out how you're going to come up with the rest of the, getting us 100% by the December goal, which is only 4 months away. What's your backup plan if it doesn't get there?
Sir, so as I said, you know, and one, I will say that initial estimates back in January were prior to actual engineering analysis done on this effort. We did break this out in terms of specific capabilities that needed to be delivered. We scheduled them, and we scheduled them very specifically so we did not have peaks and valleys, that we had a very level, even level of effort throughout the entire effort. I do understand that, you know, it's very clear that, you know, what the numbers that we provided last week were, let me just say, they were very specific to function points that were being delivered in August or versus December. That does not actually tell the full story of this effort. And we're more than happy to come in, and we've offered to come brief the committee on various points along the way. We have, you know, function points. All function points are not equal, as well as the impact of their delivery on this full effort. The most critical pieces of this, the hardest parts of this effort, are actually being delivered in August. The ability to manage, to take a claim and be able to track individual contentions within a claim, the ability to break into our 3 new lanes of where an appeal can go and track at the contention level is actually being delivered next month. Most of the additional pieces are follow-on details and of much lower level of effort.
Okay. This law was signed into by the President on August 23rd, 2017. But you didn't deliver the detailed plan for the IT schedule until February. Can you see why this committee is a little concerned on where we're going with this? And my original question was, if you don't make it, what's the plan? Because you're telling me you're going to make it, but everything we were watching from this committee, and we want to work with you. We want to see it happen. But every time we turn around, it's like, we're going to get there. We're going to get there. We're guaranteeing we're going to get there. And we're just getting towards the edge, and that's my concern. So is there another plan in case you don't make it?
Let me deal with this one. Yes, sir. I appreciate that. I appreciate the perspective, and I understand completely what you're seeing. A little closer to the project, we're seeing different information in terms of the regular drumbeat of the activities we're supposed to see. And again, our offer is to come to you and your committee and explain what we're seeing in more detail. I appreciate the perspective, though, and it's not lost on me, as well as the reference to the GI Bill. What I can tell you is, yes, there is a backup plan. Broadly, while we wait for the system to come on, we will do things manually to honor the commitment of, dealing with appeals.
That's
So
an important part.
we will have that. It is unpleasant to talk about because it is expensive, but again, what we're seeing, what I'm seeing in terms of the IT progress is solid. It doesn't reflect perhaps what you're seeing, which leads me to think we need to explain more in detail to explain our level of confidence.
And we in this committee do that, but Ms. Curta, you also see a problem with this, right? GAO has been very clear in what they've given to us, that there's a problem.
Yes, we have several open recommendations to VA on its IT planning, including the need for more detailed schedules for when VBMS updates will be completed, when case flow functionality will be in place, when testing will be done, and so forth. And we have not seen the detail we would need to see to close those recommendations. And we have not seen the objective information that they've been describing that gives them confidence that they'll be 35% done or 100% done, and we haven't seen that information.
Okay, just so you know, as you can tell, by every question that's coming up from up here, we are all concerned, and we're depending on you to make sure it happens. So with that, I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. Ms. Esty, you recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the Vice Ranking Member and the Chairman and all of you for joining us on this important endeavor, which is so important to millions of veterans across this country. And I will say we've been impressed with the speeding up of appeals, and all of that is in the right direction. But as you can tell from our questions, we're very concerned that this continue. So I have 3 questions I'd like to ask for Undersecretary Lawrence. The RAMP program is crucial to successful implementation of the appeals process by giving us information and feedback, you and us, information and feedback about how it's proceeding. But we are all concerned, and the chairman referenced this, that we've only got a 13% uptake based on the outreach. So what do you think is going to be the effect on processing notices of disagreement and appeals in the future if we don't get to a significantly higher percentage than 13%?
Certainly, we're we're learning a lot from AMP, as I indicated in my statement, and I also share the experience the chairman did when he talked about what he experienced. I think if you sort of think about our journey at the beginning, it was a promise, and as a result, one could imagine folks being reluctant to participate. Now we have information about what happens when you participate in terms of the grant rate and the speed. We are trying really hard to communicate that regularly. While he was at the DAV conference, I was at the Veteran Foreign Wars and put up a slide in my presentation and explain the contribution of the VSOs in our places, in our RO, where the participation rate is amongst the highest and the difference where it is amongst the lowest. It is our educating the VSOs and getting them to talk to their veterans about what happens when you go through the experience. So I'm very positive on the experience. I think broadly it began low, and had it stayed low, I think that would have been a real knock on VBA. But the fact that we began to think about why this was and take more outreach steps and communicate more. Plus, we now have a good story to communicate. So I'm very positive about what RAMP is going to give us.
Again, I agree with you on everything you said, but it isn't the answer to the question, what's going to happen. So we can return to that.
Sure.
And I do think you should look to use us as well and the VSOs and put up on your website and other places to get that information out so people understand, perhaps even put veterans up who have gone through the process to explain and demystify it for people. Just a suggestion.
Thank you.
Secondly, I know there have been some concerns raised that the reason for low participation may be that the notices, and we've talked about this many times before your tenure, about plain language in notices. We've heard informally feedback. The VSOs have been pretty happy with it, in part because I think they work very closely with VA. The state resource officers have not been as enthusiastic. We've heard informally they still feel that this is inadequately clear. Can I get your commitment to continue to work with them and every other group that is responsible for successful implementation to ensure that we're all working together?
Yes, absolutely.
And
just
training for folks and all of that.
Yes, one quick point. I know your time is an thing. I did watch the hearings as part of my preparation for confirmation. One of the first things I did was convene a group and say, tell me about the letter. So we will continue to work with, and yes, we will work with you.
And that works with everybody, those who feel that they're where they need to be and those who really feel that they need to be moved, and that may be a matter of education. Final question for Ms. Curda. Again, if you can really specify the importance of establishing ahead of time broad criteria for implementation and success, and the need to do that ahead of time. I know it is annoying because you're trying to get everything ready to implement, and I know, Mr. Thrower, you are trying to do that. But if we don't have criteria ahead of time, can you please detail what the problem is if we don't have broad criteria for assessment prior to implementation?
Certainly. Both the RAMP pilot and the more recent BEAM pilot are positive steps. I mean, certainly we all agree it is good to learn something about veteran behavior before implementing the system, but they really aren't designed to be complete pilot tests of what the new system, how it will work, and testing whether it will be working as is intended. It is a limited test. It is not generalizable. And the criteria, they haven't specified, okay, having undertaken these tests, at what level of performance of the system would we consider this an acceptable performance that we could then certify and be confident that in implementing the full system, we have confidence that everything will go smoothly and as according to plan.
Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman, if you yield, Dr. Dunn, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank the panel for being here, and thank you very much, Secretary Lawrence. I know you're fairly new on the job here, been there less than 3 months, I think. Is that right? yeah. So, but I was reading your bio over the weekend. I have to say, you know, I've been guilty of being pessimistic at times about how the VA is going to solve all these problems. But I think we've got terrific background here in yours to tackle some of the big problems in the VA. So I'm hopeful. I'm allowing myself to be hopeful there. I noticed that you were named twice like the National Public Service Leader organization's outstanding, and that you're an airborne infantry captain, right?
Sure, of the two, I'm most proud of the second one, and the first one, just to qualify, I was one of 100 people who were selected in that thing. It's nice of you.
Outstanding, outstanding. Well, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
So, although it's been early, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. What do you see as the biggest challenge on the benefits side of the VA organization, and what do you think is the most promising thing over there?
One of the most challenging things is to just work the number of claims we get. There's no magic to that, just simply the processing. We get a lot of them, and the real challenge is to continue the progress that's been made and not maintain. My biggest concern is organizations struggle when they maintain performance. So I've talked about embracing the changes but accelerating and learning from it as we go forward. So that's something I pay attention to a lot, and trying to understand if there's new ways to think about it based on what we've learned and the like. The most promising thing I've seen is, just as I alluded to a minute ago, it is a very strong team that is very focused. As you saw in my bio, I've been a consultant to government and have worked in other government agencies. I think the VBA team is amongst the leaders in discipline in terms of how they manage things, and measurement, quite frankly.
That's outstanding. Thank you. So if you could ask a bunch of congressmen and congresswomen to lean in and help you in some way, what would you ask of them?
Well, first, I'd want to make sure we delivered on all the things you'd already given us. So that's my first thing. So I would do it carefully. I think I'd probably follow up on some recommendations of how to enlist your help in terms of the communication and the connectivity to the states and the different parts where you are, as well as really thinking through, but I haven't done this yet, an understanding of how to really modernize the IT systems we work with. But I'm not asking that now, because I need to think that through further. And I know coming off some difficult moments, that's not the excuse, and that's not what I'm trying to do. But I do think as we think about doing, and I think Mr. Wilkie talked about that in his confirmation about being agile, that's something we're going to have to understand in terms of how old the systems are we deal with and our ability to do that. So those are two things I would call those coming through the back of my mind. They are not requests at this point, though I appreciate the encouragement from you and other members on this committee.
Have you had enough time to get your arms around the budget yet? I mean, is it bloated? Is it too big? Is it too small? Is it?
Well, yes, I'd have, but I will, I'm sure you can ask me a question about the budget that I won't know the answer to. But here's my general observation. What goes on at VBA is a function of the veterans asking for our help. So it's an input-output sort of model. Veterans are asking a lot from us in terms of delivering the benefits. Right now, my assessment is appropriate. As we continue to see how these programs work out and the like, could very well come back and ask for more. I will be unlikely in my tenure to send you a check back, quite honestly.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn my attention to Ms. Mason briefly. How many hearing requests are currently pending at the board?
Currently, we have over 84,000 hearing requests pending.
So how many requests in 2017 did we have? How many requests did we have versus how many did we complete? So the input-output balance, the net.
I believe in 2017, we had a little less than 80,000, and we completed over 13,000, sir.
So 80,000 requests, 13,000 done.
We offered 25,000 in 2017, but only 13,000 veterans took us up on that.
So you've fallen behind there.
We are. When we're working towards moving ahead and trying to look for new opportunities and working with IT on expanding our hearings, as well as our the foundation for that.
Are you optimistic we could catch up? That's pretty far behind.
I am optimistic we can catch up. One of the initiatives that I have already started is working with the VSOs and our stakeholders on veterans' requests for hearings and getting our arms around what those exactly are and how we move through those.
All right. Thank you very much. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Brownlee, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too just wanted to put my 2 cents in relative to this issue that the GAO has pointed out with regards to the articulation of performance measurements. It seems to me that we're sort of putting the cart before the horse here. And Mr. Lawrence, I wanted you to respond specifically to that certainly the GAO was saying that these performance goals and measures haven't been articulated, which therefore lacks a vision, which therefore will, as implementation moves forward, will lack, some kind of accountability. And you also mentioned that you plan on having a new update in August relative to some of the GAO recommendations. So if you could just comment on that, and do you perceive to have that included in the August update?
Certainly. Let me comment on the first part and then ask Mr. McClanahan to talk about the update because he's been working with them on that directly. I'm going to go look into this because I'm hoping it's a communication challenge on our part because I do think we have goals and performance metrics that we talk about and perhaps we haven't communicated in sufficient detail. So I'm certainly accepting their advice and counsel, and I want to try to figure out what's behind that because I have a pretty good sense in my own mind of what success looks like, and I want to make sure we provide that. So I'll take that and report back however appropriate. But let me enlist Mr. McClanahan to talk about the August update because I know he and Chairman Mason have been working closely on this.
Yes, Dr. Lawrence is correct. We do have goals and metrics. We, from the very beginning, to include ramp and final implementation for the 2 VBA lanes, our goal has been 125 days, and that's what we'll be tracking against. So we will have timeliness measures, average days to complete, and the average age of our pending inventory. We also have a robust quality program in VBA. One of the things that GAO has asked us to do is to expand upon the details about that quality assurance program that we have, so we'll do that as well. And then finally, we do track production. We set production targets, and we track against those targets. And we're also doing work on customer satisfaction surveys as well. So we are addressing all of those metrics. We have them. We will be using them and measuring them going forward.
Ms. Curda, does that sound consistent to you or correct?
Well, that is certainly what has been discussed in plans, that they are working on it, they're doing things, but we haven't seen the specific goals and measures that they're talking about. It's particularly in the board side of things, that we've seen the VBA goals, but the board, 2 of the lanes lack timeliness goals.
And can you give us a timeline on when those would be clearly articulated and public?
For the board, the lanes that Ms. Curda is referring to, I believe, are the 90-day evidence lanes and the hearing lanes under the AMA. We do have the 365 lane already identified. That we will have those decisions done in 365 days. The 90-day lane and the hearing lane we're going to have to assess that, and we're working to assess that. The promise we made to the stakeholders in March of 2016 was the legacy veterans and the 365 veterans have priority in the way we do our cases at the board. And so we're continuing to assess that, and I'm working to try and get some timeliness goals around those other 2 lanes. I'm not there yet.
Okay. Well, you didn't give a timeline, so I understand that everybody's working on it, but I think we would like to see a time frame, and then obviously we would like to see what the performance metrics actually are so that we can do our job, and part of our job is oversight and making sure that we're meeting these goals and obviously providing the best services that we can to our veterans. Mr. Lawrence, I wanted to ask you a very specific question relative to the LA Regional Office. The director has been missing for a year now. There is an interim person who is sitting in that position. I know I wrote a letter along with my colleagues last November asking for a swift appointment to fill that position. We never received a response, and to my knowledge, there's still not a permanent director. Can you give me an idea of when you plan on filling this position?
I know I talk regularly with our folks who lead the field operations about openings and how we're going through the HR process to fill them. I'm unfamiliar with the details of this, but I will follow up and get back to you on that.
Okay. Well, the LA Regional Office covers 8 California counties. It's a very large office, processes a lot of benefits, over $1.5 billion in annual payments, and not having that position filled is a problem. It seems as though the performance there, based on what we can discern from the data, has remained generally pretty steady over this last year, which is good, but it also seems to, in July, there's a little start of ticking, in an upward projection, which obviously we want just the opposite. And my last question is to Ms. Curda.
Ask the gentlelady to speed
Oh,
up.
I apologize. I yield back.
Thank the gentlelady for yielding back. You did get carried away. That's okay. Mr. Matt, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Lawrence, Ms. Mason, I'd wonder if you could, one of you, help to enlighten the committee, take us through a day in the life of somebody that's working through these appeals, whether it's somebody going through the higher level appeal, whatever ramp it is that they want to go through. What is the time frame from the time they get something placed on their desk when we're sitting here trying to do the math on saying, okay, there's however many tens of thousands of people waiting on one of these, there's new ones coming in. What does that look like for them? What is a day in the life, a day in the week, or a day in the month of, for them doing all of that? Is it different for me, or how different is it for somebody like General Bergman, who has substantially more years of distinguished service than I do, or what's the difference?
Well, I'll start with the board. A day in the life of an attorney at the board is once the case gets to the board, and we process those cases in docket order. And so every day, there's cases coming into the attorneys and the judges. So the judge would assign the case to the attorney. The attorney would begin working the case. Depending on the number of issues, it may take a day, it may take a little bit more.
Take me through that, working the case. He gets the case, working the case.
Working the case means that they're going in through our electronic record system, looking at all the evidence in the record, and the board, because it does a de novo review, the attorneys are required to review everything in the record and electronically, and review those records and make sure that we have identified all the issues, all the contentions, any concerns, anything that we haven't addressed at the board that is, if it's an administrative issue, then that's going to stop it. And
Does
so-
that mean they're reading every page of whatever is
Yes.
submitted for that item of their health that is being looked at?
Yes, they're reading the entire claims folder. In these days, it's electronic, so they're reading it electronically.
How many pages could we be talking about?
Thousands of pages.
On one case?
For one case. And if it's multiple issues, tens of thousands of cases. Because we're talking about from the time, we're looking at the service records, we're looking at the evidence that the veterans have submitted in support of their cases, we're looking at medical records, we're looking at hearing transcripts. Anything in that record is what the attorneys are reviewing and looking at. And so depending on the complexity of the case and the number of issues and things like that, the attorneys can assess it very, with the reading and the amount of time going through that. Then they're assessing as they're reading through and making determinations about what they're doing with the cases. Then, usually the next day, they're writing. So they're writing the decision up for the judge. Sometimes it takes longer than 2 days. Sometimes the attorneys are working several cases at once, depending on what's going on with their caseload, because the attorneys do approximately 3.25 cases a week at the board. So those cases are moved through. They write up the decision, again, through the template program we have. Through the assessment, there's conversations back and forth with the judge during that process. Then the decision goes into the judge. Once the judge gets the decision, the judge then, and the judges are deciding over 20 cases a week these days, with the board's current productivity. And again, it depends on the number of issues in the case. So the judge is going then to assess the file and take a look at the file. The attorney will have tabbed the important evidence that's vital to the judge, and that's going to be connected through the interactive decision template so they can link back to it through the decision and be able to review and sign that decision. And then the decision goes out the door to dispatch, which takes a couple of days with the electronic signing of the decision and then the upload to VBMS. And then from there, the case goes to VBA for effectuation.
That research portion of it, what's your expectation of how long that should take? That seems like the most intensive portion of all of this. What's your expectation? Again, understanding that everybody is a different case, but what's the expectation there of reasonable?
That takes, realistically, that is 60 to 70% of the attorney's time on each case. So I can't tell you a set number of hours. It depends on the number of issues per case.
Attorneys are pretty good about knowing how many hours they want to charge
They are
somebody.
pretty good. They are pretty good. More senior attorneys are more efficient at it, and we do have the specialty case team in place to help with that. But,
So what's the expectation?
A straightforward case that's fairly straightforward case would be somewhere between 8 to 10 hours for one of my, experienced attorneys.
8 to 10 hours for 1,000 to 10,000 pages.
And that would be to include the writing time.
That's absolutely alarming to me. Thank you for your responses.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, can you talk about how you have engaged the regional offices in the transition from the legacy process to RAMP, just to make sure they have what they need for when the full implementation comes?
Sure. Broadly, I've engaged the regional offices as part of, taking over and engaging with them. I've established a district counselor, top 10 folks, to randomly provide me advice, and I'm convening with them tomorrow. But in terms of appeals specifically, let me enlist Mr. McClanahan, because he's worked with them for a longer period of time.
So one of the things that we did is we developed Appeals Modernization 101 training, and we required every VBA employee that's related to claims processing, not just appeals, but just even claims processors, to take that training. As of yesterday, we were at 99% completion on that training. In addition to that, the regional offices that are working on RAMP claims, they've received specialized training, both initial and follow-up, and they receive 100% review for a month when they start working those. If you look at Appendix C in the 90-day update to our implementation plan, there's a listing of all of the outreach and communications that we have done. I've personally visited regional offices that have the most eligible veterans and talked to local congressional staff, attorneys, VSO representatives, and our own employees to make sure everybody has a good understanding of the new system. So we've taken a very aggressive approach.
Have you received much feedback or buy-in from the regional offices themselves? Like, has that affected the way that you're doing the rollout?
Yes, strong buy-in from regional offices. I think what we're really seeing when we go out locally is a lack of complete understanding. And between us, me and Chairman Mason, and the VSO representatives that have knowledge of the program, once that explanation is done, then there definitely is complete commitment to it.
Okay. Do you know whether vacancies in the regional offices are going to complicate the implementation of this at all? Has that come up as you visited or talked to folks? Like, I know in Pittsburgh, for example, near where I'm from, we have an assistant director vacancy. Is that something you've seen around the nation?
So what I can tell you about is our appeals workforce. As the Undersecretary said, 1,495 employees. We are almost at full strength on the appeals teams that do this work. We're down about 17 at this minute.
Okay. Chairman Mason, did you have something to add there? It looked like you were leaning in. I didn't.
No.
Okay. Ms. Kurta, do you believe, with everything we've heard today, with everything you've studied before you came here today, do you believe it's possible to roll out this plan on time?
I think it will be challenging. I think you can certainly always make improvements, and in the sort of discipline of risk management, risk reduction, any risk you can identify and mitigate is going to increase your odds of success. And so what we're talking about here are odds and chances, not certainty. I think as it stands now, I'm a little concerned about the lack of detail, but if the detailed information that the board and VBA are talking about is available and we make it available to us to take a look at it, we might have greater assurance than we have right now.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you, gentleman, for yielding. General Bergman, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the panel for being here. If this was easy, it had already been done. Okay, so we know you're all engaged. Congressman Mast just left, but I told him on his way out, thank you for allowing me to, he teed up what I was about to say on the front end, and that is any general officer, and I'll keep it to the Army and the Marine Corps at this point, because we're largely infantry, and any general officer worth their salt knows that they do what they do every day for those young infantrymen and women who are at the pointy end of the spear, and that never changes, no matter while you're in uniform, but even after your uniform days have completed. So, can we agree here as a group that a simple mission statement based upon the title of our hearing here is that to successfully implement appeals reform? Is that a pretty simple mission statement?
That's correct. Yes, we agree.
Okay, and when you implement a mission statement, someone has to be in command of that mission. And there is a difference, there is a unique difference in command and staff. That's why we have command and staff colleges. There are people in command, and there are people on the staff providing that valuable input, and you are usually, over the course of time, you will establish yourself either as one of those commanders, who is the person to be in command, or as a really solid staff officer who supports that commander. And there's a difference between the two. So having said that, who's in command?
This is somewhat of a unique situation, but I'm not going to defer your question. In February 2019, the board will be in command of appeals. At this point, for VBA, I'm in command of the VBA Legacy Appeals. The chairman's in command of the board's Legacy Appeals. In my opening statement, that's why I referenced working closely together through this unique period of time, but in February, the chairman will be in command.
Okay, so mission failure is not an option, but there are, in the military terms, reliefs for cause, okay? And this could be mission failure. Is your organization set up to, before the mission fails, to relieve a commander who maybe is not getting it done, and all of a sudden we wake up, at the 11th or 11 hour 30, are you prepared to make changes if the milestones are not being met?
Yes, sir. In fact, again, in my opening statement, I alluded to the second week I was there, I began to meet regularly with the AMO office, and I meet with them regularly to monitor performance, and that's one of the things I think regularly.
Yeah, I hope this doesn't seem harsh. This is just reality, and the constituent population that we're serving here, the veterans, know that we have, as commanders, have held them accountable for mission accomplishment and their performance, in that unit involved in that fight. And I know that they expect us to do the same at the highest levels. And as partners in this with you, in other words, as a committee member, trying to be part of the solution, not be part of the problem, stay out of your way, but at the same time, we hold ourselves accountable to our constituents here as in our districts, but also as fellow members of the committee. I just wanted to hear you articulate to whatever level you'd like the accountability within your system, that if something goes bad, sooner rather than later, people will be either reassigned, whatever it is, so that the mission does not fail just because somebody said, well, we have some flexibilities here.
Sure. You have my assurance, and just so you know, my father was in the military, as I was. One of the things I learned from him was mission first, men always, and we talk about the mission all the time and what that's going to take. And as you know, a great deal of flexibility moving people. So yes, that would be my intention, were that the reason.
Yeah, there will be naturally after-action reports that occur that, okay, lessons learned, we can do this better, we can do that better. But just saying, well, we tried, but we didn't get it, we didn't meet the deadlines, that's not acceptable. And I just appreciate all your effort, and whatever we can do to be part of the solution here with you, to repeat that one more time, we're all in. So, and I see my time is about to expire. So, thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. Ms. Custer, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panel for being with us. We've had a lot of discussion this morning about deadlines and timing. I'm going to shift gears here a little bit to the financing of it all. And I noticed from the GAO report that one issue deserves extra attention. So in the plan, the VA has failed to, quote, delineate the total resources required by VBA and the board. On our part, we think it's unclear what the delineation would entail, but given the lack of information for costs between the discrete appeal systems, it's going to make our oversight more difficult. So I want to turn the question to the VA. Why does your plan fail to keep separate account of costs for the VBA and the board, and how should we continue our oversight trying to make that distinction?
Let me go first from the VBA perspective. I'm going to have to research this further because I have a pretty good insight into costs. So I'll ask Mr. McClanahan to jump in terms of the interaction with GAO. But I commit to figuring that out, why that is, because, you know, as an economist, this cost is something I understand. So we will figure this out, but I know, Dave, you work closely with them.
Yes, one of the things that GAO asked us to do is improve our sensitivity analysis for our modeling that we've done. We have delineated how we're going to allocate our resources, excuse me, in VBA. In addition to that, in the President's FY19 budget, we've requested 605 additional FTE. So we believe that we have hit the target on that financial piece that you're asking about.
In the past, has the money flowed back and forth between these accounts? I'm just looking for our oversight to be able to delineate that distinction.
No, they are separate funding for VBA and for the board.
Okay.
Could we address that question? Because I think there is
Yes.
some confusion
Yes, thank you.
about the requirement and about you know, how to implement that. And I just wanted to ask my colleague Jamie to just describe a little bit what we're seeing in the plan versus what we would expect to see.
Sure. So the plan, the element requires VA to delineate the total resources between VBA and the board and legacy and new appeals processes. And in this latest plan, VBA provided FTE information, but the board did not. And there's also not a delineation of other resource categories you would expect to see in processing legacy and new appeals, like the IT piece and communications with veterans and other stakeholders. Those sorts of things are missing from the plan for that element.
All right, so that's helpful if we can get that information following up from the VBA and the VA. I think, you know, obviously in your testimony you talked about a significant number of new employees, and I think while we support the mission of moving forward and addressing certainly the backlog and keeping up going forward, this committee routinely is going back to our colleagues who are cost conscious, and we need to use our oversight function to be on top of that. So if you could bring that information back to the committee, that'd be helpful. I am going to turn my last minute over to Ms. Brownlee.
Thank you, Ms. Custer. I just wanted to ask Ms. Kurta in terms of, well, let me back up for a minute. I think this committee, and certainly I am continually concerned about the fact that there are so many positions across the VA that are unfilled positions. So my question to you is, do you think the VA has the right amount of human capital plans and management capacities to implement, you know, to successfully implement this reform? Have you taken a look at that at all?
We have not assessed whether they have adequate resources to implement this. I think in terms of risk, when you have unfilled positions and a large change and a new process to implement, that creates, to the extent you have unfilled position, it does create additional risk that you won't have the resources to fully implement the reform.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thanks, Gentlelady, for yielding. Ms. Radewagen, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I also want to thank the panel for coming in today. Thank you for your service. My question here is for all the witnesses at the table. Given that the title of this hearing is assessing whether VA is on track to successfully implement appeals reform, I'd like to ask each of you to give VA a grade, A, B, C, D, or F, on this assessment, what it would be and why.
Sure, I'll go first. I would give us an A-. I think some of the critique that our colleagues from GAO have rendered is fair and appropriate, and I wish that we were more complete in providing them the information. But overall, when I assess, as they indicated, a model of people, process, and technology, and when I do the review behind each of them, I think we're doing very well. Then that's in many ways reflected in my confidence that we are going to be on time.
I would agree with the Undersecretary that it is an A-. Again, people, process, and technology is something the board has been focused on for the past 2.5 years, and we're continuing to focus on that, and we will be on time.
I would just say our assessment is based on the information that was provided in this plan, which is the report that was provided and updated recently. And we have also invited VA to provide additional information, and they have in some cases to supplement what's in here. And, looking over all of this, without knowing some of the things that they're doing that aren't in plans and aren't documented and that we haven't seen, I would give them more like a C. It's intermediate. They are on their way. This could be much better in terms of what we're seeing.
So I hate to disagree with my boss, but that's a position you've put me in. But just based on our requirements of addressing GAO's recommendations, I'll lower it to a B. So.
I think I would agree with Mr. McClintock, just simply from the point of view, for one reason only. I would give us a B because I think we could do a better job of communicating across the board about our progress and our status, and that would help. But I think overall, in terms of our effort and where we are, I am totally on board with the Undersecretary and the Chairman that we're going to make it on time, that we're on track, and that we're going to deliver.
From my perspective, I would also say a B, just because I don't like to be overly optimistic. I know we still have a lot of work to do, and I want to give us a little bit of a challenge to get up to the A level. But one thing that I've observed, we mentioned earlier about the regulations, and that's been part of the process I've been fairly heavily involved in, and the proposed rule notice for a very major set of regulations to implement this program is with the Federal Register. I understood from this morning, what I learned this morning, it won't be published today, but publication is imminent. That's a big step in the process. I think we're on track to get the regulations in place in order to implement on time.
And now this question is for Chairman Mason. Chairman Mason, a key component of VA's space allocation plan to accommodate new hires is to allow board employees with little VA experience to participate in telework. What are VA's plans to collect information from supervisors to ensure that telework is not negatively affecting the quality of work or morale?
We currently have a very strong telework program at the board. We have over 475 people. I believe current numbers are around 488 people on either telework or full remote status. We do have a very strong and robust program in evaluating whether someone's ready to go on telework. and that is worked through the supervisor. During the period that they're on telework and from then on, we assess them just as we assess all of our staff, our attorney staff, who whether they're in the office or on telework. We work with them if they flounder, and we provide support. And if need be, they are offered the opportunity to come back into the office and work with us. But the telework program for our space program does seem to work very well. And the majority of the people on telework right now, I would think, I would have to double check the numbers, but I believe the majority of our telework staffers are meeting or exceeding goal. Current staff, we have 92% at full successful at current status.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, gentlelady, for yielding. And Mr. Craig, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. General question as well to the panel. And appeals reform. When you hear reform, you think positive and maybe the challenges of the risks inherent. So my question is, how do you mitigate the risk? I mean, how do you make sure that as you jump from this to something better that we don't overlook certain things? Are you having any pilot projects to make sure that maybe everything, all the dots are, the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed? What are we doing to make sure that we're not leaving anything behind?
Sure. Let me go first, and then I'll list others to answer as you've directed. A couple things, sir. Yes, it's not correct, I think, to call it a pilot, but the RAMP, the Rapid Appeals Modernization Program, has given us real insight to the veterans' experience, our ability to deliver, and the like. So that's pretty important. In addition, the primary tool as the leader is, regular reviews that are detailed enough to better understand, how this is all going to work, and quite frankly, candid conversation about what the risks are, how we're mitigating them, and evaluation of that as we work our plans going forward. So let me make sure I have enough time.
I would agree with the Undersecretary. Ongoing meetings and assessments and check-ins and make sure we're on target. The board is just concluded the initial phase of the BEAM program where we're collecting that data and moving out with that. That is a small-scale test program. We will also be rolling out the RAMP assessment in October, and we will also be doing some sensitivity reviews, surveys at those times to gather information, so as well as the ongoing conversations with our stakeholders.
Go ahead.
I would just add that the legislation actually sets us up for making sure that we are doing that mitigation assessment. We had to do the implementation plan, the regular updates. We have the assistance of GAO, so there's a lot of assessment of what the risks are and how we might address them in that implementation plan.
If I could add to that too, I think the level of commitment and communication that I've observed on this process has been very exemplary. I've been with the agency for a long time, and we've been communicating on a really regular basis between the Veterans Benefits Administration, the Board of Veterans Appeals, the Office of General Counsel. I think that's really helped us keep on track and recognize what the obstacles we face are and make sure nothing's slipping through the cracks.
Yeah, and really, I guess, to close out for our team on this one is, it is a combination of many of those things. We have integrated working teams that cut across anything that's working in the IT space. It's a very close collaboration with the VBA team and the board team, so we're all on the same page all of the time. Regular reviews, I meet with Dr. Lawrence and Chairman Mason on a very regular basis, as do our teams, and present status and update. And along the way is also in terms of building in, along the way, touch points and cushions to be able to modify and adjust as we need to along the way.
Let me just thank all of you for the work you're doing, the effort, and also let you know this is not your job, it's our job. So if there's anything we can do, input as fast as you can give us that information so we can react as legislators would be much appreciated. And again, I thank you for the good work you do for all of our veterans.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding. Mr. Poliquin, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, today we have two very important guests with us today I'd like to introduce you to. Mr. Graham Perry and Mr. James Hotham have traveled all the way from the great state of Maine. They are student leaders, community leaders when it comes to the Future Farmers of America organization. And I would like to acknowledge them, Mr. Chairman, and have Mr. Perry and Mr. Hotham stand so the rest of America can see you. Go ahead, gentlemen. Stand up, please. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Folks, thank you very much for being here. We're all on the same page. We want you to be incredibly successful. The great state of Maine has about 9.5% to 10% of our population are veterans. We love our veterans in the state of Maine. Our first VA hospital in the country is located in the state of Maine in Augusta, Togus. I think it was formed 1865. 65 and 66 to take care of our veterans after the Civil War. That tells you the commitment we have to our veterans. And I'll tell you, Mr. Chairman, traveling throughout the great state of Maine, I hear as often as anything else when it comes to our veterans community that the backlog on the appeals that they have filed is something that really drives them batty. And I know you know that, and we're trying to fix it, and we're all on board to try to help you do that. Just as a curiosity, we have about 7 million veterans now that we're taking care of in our country. Mr. Lawrence, roughly what % of them are on some form of disability? Roughly. Anybody have that answer?
I'm reluctant to guess on that one, sir. I'll get back to you with more.
Yeah, that'd be great. If you can get back to me on that, that'd be great. Can someone tell me here, Mr. Lawrence will point to you if you don't mind, or ask you rather that question, what % of your project is done, roughly?
Sure. Let me defer to Mr. McClanahan and Mr.
Sure.
Thrower.
Absolutely. Sir.
So I'd say probably about, in my view, about 2/3.
Great.
For example, the regulations, procedures, all the policies around implementing the law. So really what we need going forward is once we get the IT piece in place, you know, I'm pretty confident that
And you're gonna, and you support what's been said here earlier, that you folks gonna meet your goal on time, correct?
Yes.
Okay, it's early February 2019, if I have that correct. Okay. Do you still have a claims backlog that is through the roof that it was before we started this process?
No. No.
Good.
The claims backlog has been brought down with a lot of work prior to my arrival, and right now it hovers between 70,000 claims that are over 125 days and 80,000.
Okay, I think, Mr. Chairman, that was about 400,000 when we started this process. Maybe I've got that wrong, but it was a heck of a lot larger. Yes?
The claims are different from appeals. The appeals
thank
are
you.
still about 400,000.
Appreciate that correction. Thank you very much. Mr. Lawrence, can you tell me to the best of your ability the fact that in some areas, what I've heard today is that we are behind in some areas, what would be the number one thing that comes to mind to you why we have slipped, if we have, in certain areas?
Yeah, respectfully, I don't mean to quibble on slipping. I think we are on schedule, and I think that the offer I made earlier is to meet with your staff to explain that, especially in the IT area, because I know we bantered numbers. I take seriously the feedback from GAO, and I want to look into that to figure out why they didn't give us at least an A- in my scale. But I'm confident from broad strokes we are on schedule.
Well, you might guess that when you say A- and the GAO says C, then it raises some antenna that I have. But we'll take it as it is. The great state of Maine has two districts. I represent the 2nd District, which is highly rural. We have Lewiston, Auburn, which is about 35,000 people. We call it L.A. And then we have Bangor, which has about 35,000 people. Then we have 400 small towns. And Mr. Berry and Mr. Hotham in the back of the room are from 2 of those small towns. What I'm concerned about is, are you folks going to be able to communicate at the right time the changes to the appeals process effectively to folks in rural America, which is very different in many ways than folks that live in the urban areas? Mr. Lawrence?
Yes, sir. This has been one of the issues that I've been counseled about since I very first showed up at the beginning of the process, about the unique the unique features of states like you described that are rural. So it's something more broadly VBA is thinking about all the time. In terms of the tools and techniques we use, I don't want them to be East Coast centric, but obviously access to technology and the like. In addition, we're thinking seriously about the relationship the VBA has with the states then have with their networks as a way to communicate with folks. Also, as Chairman Mason and Mr. McClellan, it's the repetition and getting out, and quite frankly, through the VSOs, explaining in a very personal way the benefits of being involved.
We have formed in the great state of Maine a Veterans Advisory Panel to help me to make sure I get all the on-ground information I need to bring back to our committee with the chairman. And if we can help in any way communicate this, we certainly will. We are all on board. Good luck, but we will be holding you accountable. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding back. And I will be in the great state of Maine next month to clear all that up for Mr. Poliquin. We'll be up there to. Ms. Brownlee, did you get your question answered?
I did, but may I say one thing?
You can.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to say that I appreciate all of you being here, and I appreciate you, Mr. Lawrence, for right up front stating deadlines and timeframes. We don't get that often, and so I appreciate all the work that you're doing, and my takeaway from this hearing is that you're working diligently to succeed. So thank you very much.
Thank you, and no further questions. I thank you for being here today. It's been, again, a very productive hearing. Mr. Takano, do you have any closing comments?
Yeah, just let me just say that I did acknowledge Congresswoman Titus earlier for her yeoman's work on the appeals modernization legislation, but I also want to acknowledge Elizabeth Esty. She took the ball and ran with it, and as our ranking member on the subcommittee jurisdiction, brought the final product along with the chairman on the majority side, and so we're to the floor. And so we're very, very proud of this legislation. The implementation is the key part. I am very concerned that the GAO would give you a current rating of a C, and it's imperative that you, Dr. Lawrence, are responsive and get the more detailed documents and planning accomplished, and in particular the generalized goals and objectives prior to the processes. Those must drive the processes. And so I am cautiously optimistic that this is going to come to fruition as we hope it will. But nevertheless, this is a tremendous undertaking, and I can't stress enough that Congress has given you the legislative tool and the resources. And so we've asked you, do you have enough resources? Do you have what you need? The indication is yes. So there is no reason for us not to succeed, and I ask that we do succeed. So thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding, and I ask unanimous consent that written statements provided for the record be placed into the hearing record without objection so ordered. And I also ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days in which to extend their remarks and include extraneous material, and without objection so ordered. And I will, just to echo Mr. Takano's comments, I think probably in our offices, the thing we hear the most about are either VA healthcare issues or VA disability claims and appeals. I think this is a gigantic step forward from 2009 and 10 when there were 1 million claims. People kind of forget that 8 years ago. So VA has made a Herculean effort to lower this, and certainly with only 70 or 75,000 claims that are over 125 days, that's a huge improvement. So that's a big shout out. And Dr. Lawrence, thank you. I know this is your first time to testify in front of the committee. We appreciate you being here. And on the quarter system, I did, while you were doing this, I took all the grades down. You are 3.1. That's your GPA for this quarter. So
I think they all went to better schools than me, sir.
to let you know. The witnesses, you're all excused, and no further comments. The meeting is adjourned.